Hi, my name is Catherine from Crime Psych. Welcome. In this video, we are going to be discussing, we're going to give a psychological analysis of Harold Shipman. In January 2000, a jury found Harold Shipman guilty of murdering 15 patients. However, a 2-year-long inquiry found that he was responsible for the murder of at least 215 people. Harold Shipman was a general practitioner and worked treating patients for the NHS in Hyde in Manchester. And he's thought to have killed mostly elderly patients over a period of at least 20 years. And this earned him the title of Britain's most prolific serial killer. Harold Shipman killed his patients with lethal doses of diamorphine and then lied about it on their death certificates to cover up his role in the deaths. The majority of people that were killed were elderly female patients who were under his care at the time. He was in a position of authority and he was trusted by those he cared for. Much of Britain's legal structure concerning healthcare and medicine was reviewed and modified as a result of Harold Shipman's crimes. He's the only British doctor to have been found guilty of murdering his patients, although other doctors have been acquitted of similar crimes or have been convicted on lesser charges. Harold Shipman is unusual for a serial killer. Most serial killers are either motivated by sexual gratification or by money. However, that doesn't seem to be the case with Harold Shipman. There have been several proposals for why Harold Shipman killed by various psychiatrists, psychologists, other academics and other professionals. While Shipman was in jail, he wrote to two of his friends called Mavis and David Scott. And these letters have been analysed by several professionals. In these letters, Shipman writes about how the police think that he's boring because he doesn't have a mistress, he doesn't have a home abroad or money in an offshore bank account. He also wrote about how nobody had seen him committing the crimes or stealing the drugs that he used to kill the patients. A psychologist named David Holmes said that the content of these letters suggested that Harold Shipman was enjoying the attention that he was receiving. Dr. Holmes also said that Shipman saw himself as superior to everybody else and that in his eyes he was some sort of medical god, if you will. A psychotherapist named Mavis Klein wrote that she thought his mother's death was a motivating factor to his killings. When Shipman was 17 years old, his mother died at age just 45, and she died a painful death from cancer. Klein suggests that his lifelong motivation was to free himself of the trauma of his mother's death by rewriting his own personal history. His gentle, painless killing of elderly female patients were bids to make his mother die less painfully, and Klein believes that the relatively few male patients that he murdered were stand-ins for himself in a bid to end his own suffering. His undisputed kindness and gentleness as a GP was an admirable way in which he sought to cancel his mother's agony. He was a very respected and well-liked GP. However, a number of other professionals have disagreed with this suggestion. All of the professionals who have commented on the case all agree that Harold Shipman was a narcissistic control freak who enjoyed the power and the control that he was able to have as a GP and as a result of deciding whether people lived or died. It was widely acknowledged that Harold Shipman was extremely arrogant. He saw himself as vastly superior to all other people. And I believe that this, combined with the controlling narcissism, is the driving force behind his behaviour. It's a neat and tidy idea that the driving force behind his killing was to end the suffering of the elderly patients because of what his mother went through. However, it doesn't explain why he dedicated years of his life to medical school to become a doctor. There are many people who go through traumatic events and don't go on to kill over 200 people. Some psychologists have speculated that his mother's death could have been the source of his morbid fascination with elderly women. As I say, at 17, Harold Shipman witnessed the slow death of his mother from lung cancer, and it is thought that it did have a lasting impression on him. On the day that his mother died, he went out for a long run, which you could suggest is an unusual act in bereavement, in grief. However, people grieve in different ways. Another psychologist or psychiatrist might comment that this going for a run was a form of him running away, and instead of having to deal with the grief that he felt, or a breaking free from his pain and having to watch his mum suffering. However, it is clear that Harold Shipman had a very high sense of self-importance, and this is very much evident in the way that he spoke to people, including the officers who interviewed him about the deaths of the patients. Shipman was initially being investigated for the forgery of a will. He tricked one of his patients into signing a will to leave him some money, and he tricked two other patients into signing as witnesses for the will, and all of those who had signed had believed that they were signing a medical consent form. However, prior to this, another GP had already raised concerns to the police because of the high number of deaths from his surgery. Inspector Stan Edgerton, who was a senior investigating officer, said that Shipman was extremely arrogant with people. He said that Shipman had made it painfully obvious that Edgerton was nowhere near his intellectual equal. The inspector said that Shipman tried to take control of the interview and was trying to lead officers' questions or to not answer the questions, suggesting that they didn't understand what he was trying to say. Now, the senior policeman who was in charge of the case deliberately handed the interview over to two less experienced officers, and one of these was a young policewoman. And Shipman evidently held her in contempt. Shipman stared at the female officer throughout the interview and was extremely condescending in the way that he spoke to her. Shipman was then presented with undeniable evidence that he'd been involved in the murders. At this point, Harold Shipman's solicitor asked for a private consultation with his client, and at that point, Shipman broke down in tears. But these were very unlikely to have been tears of remorse or regret. They were more likely to be tears of frustration. Shipman had always been used to others treating him as an authority figure, and he enjoyed being held in high regard and treated with such respect. Psychiatrists who have examined Shipman while he was awaiting trial have all come to the conclusion that his killings were an example of classic necrophilia. And the condition takes many more forms than the desire to have sex with a corpse. Some sufferers simply take pleasure from being in the presence of death. A number of Harold Shipman's traits, such as his love of order and lists, fit in with that theory, with that suggestion. Necrophiliacs often immerse themselves in the inanimate world, replacing the love of people with the love of things. Gerard Bales, a consulting psychologist at East Anglia Regional Forensic Science Services, said that narcissism would probably be an important factor in Harold Shipman's motivation. He not only considers himself as highly important, but he sees everybody else as unimportant. And people such as this can't see what they've done wrong, and the more you confront a person with what they did, the more likely they are to blame you. In conclusion then, Harold Shipman was a very controlling, manipulative person who saw himself as highly superior to all others. He believed he was so intelligent that he wasn't going to ever get caught for his crimes. He most likely enjoyed killing because he enjoyed the sense of power and the sense of control that it gave him. He's unlikely to have seen or acknowledged the victim as people, as unique individuals. He's more likely to have seen them as an object to be controlled and manipulated, and then he disposed of them as he saw fit. Thank you so much for taking the time to watch this video. I do hope that you've learned something from it. Thanks for watching. Bye for now.